My teenage daughter is trying to run away with a grown man, and I legally can't stop them. I found the receipt in my daughter Phoebe's backpack while looking for her calculus homework. Starbucks, 3:23 p.m. Starbucks was across town, nowhere near her school. But what made my hands shake was the credit card number on the receipt, partial digits that I recognized from 17 years ago. Phoebe? I called upstairs. Can you come down? She appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her school clothes. My beautiful daughter, 3 months from her 18th birthday. 3 months from when the adoption agreement's contact restrictions expired. What's up, Mom? I held up the receipt. Want to explain this? Her face went through several expressions. You went through my stuff? Your calculus teacher emailed. Said you've missed 3 classes this month. It's just coffee with a friend. Which friend pays with a credit card that starts with the same numbers as Curtis Sherman's? Phoebe slumped into a kitchen chair. How long have you known? How long have you been seeing your birth father? 4 months. 4 months. My mind raced through every drama practice, study group, friend's house she'd visited. How many were lies? He reached out on Facebook, Phoebe continued. Said he'd been waiting 17 years to meet me, that he never wanted to give me up. The adoption was closed for a reason. He has no right to contact you until you're 18. He said you'd say that. He said you'd try to keep us apart. Curtis Sherman had been 19 when Phoebe was born, a college dropout with a drug problem and a string of arrests. His parents had paid me to take Phoebe, desperate to give their granddaughter a better life. What else has he told you? The truth. Phoebe's eyes flashed with anger. That you bought me. That his parents forced him to give me up. That he's been clean for 10 years and you refused to let him see me. He was arrested for possession just 5 years ago. That's a lie. I have the arrest record. I've kept tabs on him to protect you. Or to control the narrative. She stood up, pacing. He showed me documents. Checks from you to his family. He told me my real name. The one he gave me before you changed it. Phoebe, those have to be fake. Like my whole life has been fake? He's introducing me to family you've kept me from. Grandparents who want to meet me. His parents are dead. They died in a car accident when you were 3. More lies! I pulled out my phone, showing her the obituaries. Martha and James Miller, died 2011. Phoebe barely glanced at the screen. Curtis said you'd have fake documents ready. That you're rich enough to create any story you want. Why would I do that? I've loved you since the day you were born. Or to keep me as your perfect little project. The baby you couldn't have naturally, so you bought one from a desperate teenager. Her words cut deep. Now this stranger was unraveling 17 years of trust in 4 months. Has he asked you for anything? Money? Phoebe hesitated. He mentioned that it's unfair you control money that should be mine. That when I turn 18, I should have access to everything. There it was. Curtis knew about the trust from his parents. Money they'd left for Phoebe's education that I managed. Nearly $200,000 he couldn't touch unless Phoebe gave him access. Did he mention the trust? He said his parents left it for both of us. That you manipulated the will to cut him out. His parents left that money specifically for your education because they didn't trust Curtis. I don't want to hear any more of your documents. She was crying now. I'm meeting him tomorrow. He's taking me to meet my real grandparents. His parents are dead. My maternal grandparents. My birth mother's parents. Yeah, he found her too. Another thing you hid from me. My heart stopped. Crystal Schneider. 16 when she had Phoebe. Signed away her rights and disappeared. He found Crystal? She died. Overdose 3 years ago. But her parents are alive. They want to meet me. Tomorrow at noon. Curtis is picking me up from school. You're not going. You can't stop me. I'm almost 18. You're 17. And I'm your legal parent. He's my father. And in 3 months I can choose to have him in my life without your permission. She left me standing in the kitchen, holding the receipt that had shattered our world. I called my lawyer, then the school to warn them about potential custody interference. The next morning, Phoebe left without saying goodbye. Her backpack seemed heavier than usual. When I checked her room, drawers were empty, photos missing. She wasn't just going to lunch. I called the police as I drove to her school. But when I arrived, Curtis Sherman had already arrived with a forged early dismissal form I'd supposedly signed. I stand frozen in the school parking lot, watching Curtis's silver sedan disappear around the corner with my daughter inside. The assistant principal stands next to me, still holding the forged dismissal form, and her face has gone pale as she realizes what just happened. My hands shake so badly I can barely unlock my phone to dial 911. The operator answers on the second ring, and I try to explain the situation without my voice breaking. I tell her my minor daughter has been taken by someone using fake documents, and she asks me to stay calm while she sends officers to take my report. The assistant principal touches my arm and asks me to come inside where we can wait for the police. We walk through the empty hallways to her office and she offers me water, but I can't drink anything because my throat feels too tight. She pulls up the security footage on her computer, and we watch Curtis walk into the front office at 11:47 a.m. He's wearing a button-down shirt and khakis like he dressed up for this. He hands the dismissal form to the front desk staff, and they barely glance at it before calling Phoebe down from class. On the screen, Phoebe appears in the hallway 5 minutes later with her backpack hanging heavy on her shoulders. She doesn't look scared or uncertain. She walks right up to Curtis and he puts his arm around her shoulders like they do this every day. The assistant principal keeps apologizing, saying the signature looked real enough that nobody questioned it. She's already called the superintendent to report the security breach, and I can hear the panic in her voice because she knows this is bad. 2 police officers arrive within 20 minutes and I meet them in the main office. I pull out my phone and show them everything. The Starbucks receipt with Curtis's credit card numbers. Screenshots of his Facebook messages to Phoebe that I took last night after our fight. The adoption paperwork that proves I have sole legal custody, and Curtis has no parental rights until Phoebe turns 18. One officer takes notes while the other examines the forged dismissal form under the desk lamp. They tell me this qualifies as custodial interference since Phoebe is still a minor. They'll issue a bulletin for Curtis's vehicle and get his current address from DMV records. But then the younger officer adds that since Phoebe went willingly and she's 17, the situation is complicated. She wasn't grabbed off the street. She packed her things and left with him. That makes it harder to treat this as a kidnapping even though he used fake documents to get her. I feel my chest getting tight as I realize the police might not be able to bring her home right away. The officers take my statement and promise to follow up within 24 hours. As soon as they leave, I call Reed. He answers on the first ring and I can barely get the words out to explain what happened. He tells me to come to his office right now with all my documentation. He's already pulling Curtis's criminal history and the original adoption agreement from his files. He warns me we need to move fast to protect both Phoebe and the trust fund, because Curtis clearly has a plan. I drive to Reed's office in the financial district and my hands are still shaking on the steering wheel. When I get there, Reed has cleared his conference table and I spread out everything I've collected over the years. Curtis's arrest records going back to when he was 19. The obituaries for Martha and James from 2011. Crystal's death certificate from 3 years ago showing cause of death as drug overdose. The adoption agreement with all its contact restrictions that Curtis violated by reaching out to Phoebe. Reed photographs each document with his phone, arranging them in neat rows. He explains we're building a case file that shows Curtis's pattern of problems and his likely financial motivation for this sudden reunion after 17 years. While I'm sitting there, Reed calls the trust administrator and puts her on speaker. He alerts her to potential fraud attempts and requests immediate security protocols on Phoebe's education fund. The administrator's voice comes through the phone crisp and professional. She confirms she'll flag any access requests and require multiple verification steps, including direct contact with me before any money moves or any changes to account management. Reed thanks her and hangs up, then tells me this buys us some time because even if Curtis convinces Phoebe to sign something, the bank won't process it without going through me first. I try calling Phoebe's phone, but after 3 rings, it goes straight to voicemail. I try again. Same thing. She's either turned it off or blocked my number. The silence makes my chest hurt and I have to take a deep breath before leaving a message. I keep my voice as steady as I can and tell her I love her, and she should call me when she's ready. I tell her she's not in trouble and I just need to know she's safe. Reed watches me hang up and says nothing for a minute, then goes back to drafting legal documents. He's preparing an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order against Curtis. The order will specifically prohibit Curtis from taking Phoebe from the school property or interfering with her education. Reed explains this won't bring her home right away, but it establishes legal boundaries and creates real consequences if Curtis keeps pushing. He'll file it first thing tomorrow morning at the courthouse. I drive home as the sun starts setting and the house feels too quiet when I walk in. I make myself eat something, but I can't taste it. That evening, I search Curtis's social media and find a photo he posted 2 hours ago. Phoebe is sitting in a coffee shop, smiling at the camera with a mug in her hands. The caption says, "Finally complete," with a heart emoji. The comment section is full of congratulations and heart emojis from people who have no idea what's really happening. I screenshot everything before Curtis can delete it or change his privacy settings. I send the screenshots to Reed with a message explaining when the photo was posted. He responds immediately saying this is good evidence of Curtis's manipulation, and he'll add it to our file. I try to sleep, but I can't. I check my phone every few minutes, hoping for a message from Phoebe. Around 2 a.m., I give up and go to her room. I turn on the light and start looking through her drawers for any clue about where she might be staying. Her laptop is gone. Her favorite jeans and sweaters are missing. The toiletries from her bathroom are cleared out. The photo album I made her when she was little with all her baby pictures is gone too. The emptiness of her drawers makes my chest feel tight and I have to sit down on her bed. I pick up her pillow and it still smells like her shampoo. And I finally let myself cry because my daughter is gone, and I don't know how to bring her home. I wake up the next morning feeling like I barely slept at all. My phone rings at 8:47 a.m. and the screen shows a number I don't recognize. I answer anyway because at this point any call could be about Phoebe. A man's voice introduces himself as Detective Wallace Copeland and says he's been assigned to investigate the forged dismissal form from yesterday. He asks if I can come to the police station to provide a formal statement and bring handwriting samples. I tell him I can be there in 30 minutes. He explains that document forgery is a criminal matter separate from the custody interference, and each charge strengthens the case against Curtis. I grab my purse and the folder of documents I showed Reed yesterday, then drive to the station with my hands gripping the steering wheel too tight. At the police station, a receptionist directs me to Detective Copeland's desk in a room full of other desks and ringing phones. He's maybe 50 years old with gray hair and tired eyes, and he shakes my hand before gesturing to a chair. I sit down, and he slides a form across the desk, asking me to write my signature 5 times in different spots. I do it quickly while he watches, then he pulls out the forged dismissal form in a plastic evidence bag and compares them side by side. The differences are obvious once you look closely. The forged signature has my first name written too large and the loops in my last name are wrong. Detective Copeland nods and says this will be easy to prove in court. He asks me to explain the timeline of Curtis's contact with Phoebe, and I walk him through everything from the Facebook message 4 months ago to finding the receipt to discovering her packed bags yesterday morning. He types notes on his computer while I talk, stopping me occasionally to ask specific questions about dates and locations. When I finish, he leans back in his chair and tells me he's seen similar cases where birth parents manipulate adoptees with false narratives about forced separations. His tone is matter-of-fact but not unkind. He says Curtis is probably telling Phoebe that I'm the villain who stole her away, and that he's the hero coming to rescue her. I nod because that's exactly what's happening. Detective Copeland cautions that even with clear evidence, getting Phoebe to see the truth will take time. Legal action alone won't repair the trust Curtis has damaged. He says these cases require patience and usually some kind of family therapy once the teenager realizes they've been manipulated. I thank him for his time and he promises to keep me updated on the investigation. I drive home feeling slightly more grounded because at least the legal system is taking this seriously. Around noon, Reed calls my cell phone and I answer on speaker while I'm making coffee I probably won't drink. He tells me the restraining order has been granted. Curtis is now prohibited from the school property, and any contact with Phoebe has to be supervised and documented. Reed says he's having the order served on Curtis today, which means a process server will track him down and hand him the legal papers in person. He's also notified the school district's legal team about the forged signature, which means Curtis could face criminal charges beyond just the custody interference. I feel a small surge of relief knowing there are legal boundaries in place now, even if Phoebe isn't home yet. Reed warns me that Curtis will probably get angry when he's served with the restraining order, and I should be prepared for him to lash out somehow. I promise to stay alert and call him if anything happens. An hour later, my email pings with a message from the assistant principal. I open it and find a detailed attendance report attached, showing every absence Phoebe has had over the past 4 months. 11 days total, all excused with notes supposedly from me that I never wrote. The dates are spread out strategically. Never more than 2 absences in a row so it wouldn't trigger automatic notification to parents. I print out the report and add it to my evidence folder. The pattern shows Curtis has been planning this systematically, building Phoebe's trust while isolating her from the school routines. Each forged note is another piece of evidence for the criminal case. I forward the email to both Reed and Detective Copeland with a note explaining that I never wrote any of these excuse notes. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. I open it and read the message that makes my stomach drop. The text says exactly what I knew Curtis would say once he got served with legal papers. I read it twice to make sure I'm not misreading the words. I recognize Curtis's manipulative language immediately, the way he frames everything to make me look like the bad guy. I don't respond because anything I say will be twisted and used against me. Instead, I screenshot the message and forward it to both Reed and Detective Copeland. Reed texts back within minutes telling me not to engage with Curtis at all and to document everything. That afternoon around 5, Detective Copeland calls again. He says he's located Curtis's current address through DMV records and will be conducting an interview about the forged documents tomorrow morning. He warns me not to go there myself or attempt any contact with Curtis. He explains that if I show up at Curtis's place or try to confront him, it could compromise the investigation and potentially give Curtis ammunition to claim I'm harassing him. I promise I won't go anywhere near Curtis. I'm not stupid enough to give him any excuse to paint himself as the victim. The detective says he'll call me after the interview to let me know how it went. I spend the rest of the evening sitting at my kitchen table feeling useless. Later that night, Reed calls to tell me about a strange phone call he received. A lawyer claiming to represent Curtis called his office asking about the terms of Phoebe's trust fund and whether she'll have full access when she turns 18. Reed says he professionally explained that he can't discuss client matters with unauthorized parties and ended the call. After he hung up, he looked up the lawyer's name and found out the guy specializes in estate disputes and has a reputation for aggressive tactics. Reed tells me this confirms what we already suspected. Curtis's primary motivation is financial, not paternal. He doesn't want a relationship with Phoebe. He wants access to the $200,000 in her education trust. I feel sick thinking about how Curtis has manipulated my daughter's emotions, just to get his hands on money his own parents didn't trust him with. Reed says he's going to file additional paperwork with the probate court to add extra protections to the trust, making it even harder for Curtis to convince Phoebe to give him access. I spend the evening at my laptop researching parental alienation and custodial interference cases. I read stories from other adoptive parents who face similar situations, and the patterns are eerily familiar. Birth parents rewriting history to make themselves look like victims, claims of forced adoption or stolen children, promises of real family connection and belonging. Underneath it all, there's usually some financial angle or custody revenge. One mother writes about how her daughter's birth father convinced her that the adoption was illegal, and she'd been kidnapped. Another writes about a birth mother who told her son that his adoptive parents were rich people who bought him like property. The manipulation tactics are almost identical across different cases. I bookmark several articles about how to help teenagers recognize manipulation and start reading about family therapy approaches for reunification after parental alienation. On day 3 since Phoebe left, my phone finally buzzes with a text from her number. My heart jumps and I grab the phone so fast I almost drop it. The message is brief and doesn't say much, but at least it's something. I read her words over and over trying to decode what she's really feeling. Her dismissive tone stings because it sounds like she's talking to an annoying acquaintance instead of her mother. But I'm relieved to hear from her and know she's physically safe even if she's not emotionally okay. I respond simply and carefully, not wanting to push her away by sounding desperate or angry. I type out 3 different responses before settling on the one that feels right. I tell her I love her and my door is always open and she should please stay in touch so I know she's okay. I add that she's not in trouble and I just want her to be safe. She doesn't respond to my message, but at least I know she's reading her texts. The next morning, my phone rings with a call from the trust administrator at the bank where Phoebe's education fund is held. She sounds concerned and tells me about a call she received yesterday afternoon. Someone claiming to be a family advocate called asking detailed questions about the trust structure, disbursement rules, and whether beneficiaries could authorize third-party access to manage funds. The administrator refused to provide any information and documented the call in the account notes. She tells me the caller's voice was male and sounded like he was in his late 30s, which matches the description I gave her of Curtis. She's added additional security flags to Phoebe's account, requiring multiple levels of verification before any changes can be made. I thank her for being vigilant and ask her to call me immediately if anyone else tries to get information about the trust. She promises she will, and says she's seen situations like this before, where someone tries to manipulate a young beneficiary into giving them access to family money. After I hang up, I add notes about this call to my evidence document and email the information to Reed and Detective Copeland. The net is tightening around Curtis as his attempts to access the money leave a paper trail of evidence showing his real motivation for suddenly wanting a relationship with the daughter he abandoned 17 years ago. The next morning, Reed calls to tell me he's filing papers with the probate court to add extra protection to Phoebe's trust fund. He explains the motion asks the judge to require court approval for any changes to who can access or manage the money until Phoebe turns 19 instead of 18. This means even after her birthday in 3 months, Curtis can't pressure her into signing documents that give him control without a judge reviewing everything first. Reed says this creates a barrier that makes it much harder for Curtis to trick Phoebe into handing over her education money, and the judge should approve it quickly, given the evidence of Curtis's behavior we've already documented. That afternoon, I'm checking my email when a new message appears with the subject line, "We should talk." The sender is Justina Pavlov, and my heart starts racing as I click it open. The message is careful and measured, explaining that Curtis contacted them a few days ago, claiming I kept Phoebe from her maternal family for 17 years. Justina writes that they want to hear my side of the story before making any decisions about meeting Phoebe, and they're troubled by some of Curtis's claims that don't match what they remember about the adoption. She includes her phone number and says they're available to talk whenever I'm ready. I grab my phone and call Reed immediately, reading him the email word for word. He listens carefully, and then tells me to be honest and stick to facts without getting emotional or saying bad things about Curtis. He says we should send copies of Crystal's signed papers giving up her rights and explain the closed adoption rules clearly. Together, we write a response over the phone, with Reed suggesting specific phrases that sound professional but warm. I explain that the adoption had contact restrictions until Phoebe turned 18, share the legal documents showing Crystal's choice, and tell Justina I've always been open to Phoebe knowing her maternal grandparents once she could make informed decisions as an adult. Reed reviews the draft before I send it, making sure every word is factual and can't be twisted against me later. Justina responds less than 3 hours later, and her tone is surprisingly warm and understanding. She writes that Crystal struggled deeply with drug addiction and chose adoption specifically because she wanted to give Phoebe a better life than she could provide at 16. Justina explains that Curtis was barely involved in Crystal's life after she got pregnant, and his sudden interest in Phoebe now strikes her as suspicious and wrong. She mentions that Curtis has been asking them questions about money and trust funds, which made both her and her husband Alvin uncomfortable, because it seems like his real focus isn't on building a relationship with his daughter. Justina thanks me for taking care of Phoebe all these years, and says she and Alvin would like to meet me in person when the time is right. Detective Copeland calls the next day with an update about his interview with Curtis. Curtis denied forging my signature on the dismissal form, and claimed Phoebe brought him a note I supposedly signed giving permission for the early release. His story has obvious problems since the school keeps my actual signature on file for comparison, and the forgery is clear when you look at them side by side. The detective says he's forwarding the case to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges, and Curtis could face serious penalties if they decide to prosecute. He warns me this might make Curtis more desperate, so I should stay alert and document everything. That evening, I can't stop thinking about Curtis's manipulation tactics, so I search online for information about adoptive parents dealing with birth parent problems. I find a forum where people share their stories, and one post makes my blood run cold. A mother writes about her daughter's birth father who spent months building trust, convinced the girl that her adoptive parents stole her, and eventually got her to sign financial papers giving him access to her college fund. He disappeared with the money 3 weeks after her 18th birthday, and the daughter was left devastated and broke. I screenshot the warning signs this mother lists, and every single one matches Curtis's behavior exactly. The grooming period, the revised history, the focus on money disguised as family rights, the isolation from the adoptive parent. I forward the screenshots to Reed with a message saying, "This is exactly what Curtis is doing to Phoebe." On day 5 since Phoebe left, my phone rings with a call from the trust administrator and her voice sounds urgent and worried. She tells me Curtis showed up at the bank this morning with Phoebe, and he was carrying a handwritten note that supposedly gave him permission to discuss Phoebe's account details. The bank manager came out personally because of the security flags on the account and refused to provide any information or access. Curtis got loud and angry, arguing that he had rights as Phoebe's biological father and demanding to know why he was treated like a criminal. Security had to walk him out of the building while he was still yelling about how I was stealing from his daughter. The administrator documented everything and says she'll send me a formal incident report by the end of the day. I call Reed immediately and tell him what happened at the bank. He says he'll request copies of the security camera footage and the official incident report right away, because this shows Curtis's attempts to get the trust money are getting more aggressive and desperate. Reed files another motion with the court that same afternoon, adding details about Curtis's attempted breach at the bank and asking for even stronger protections. 2 days later, the judge signs an order requiring that any trust documents Phoebe signs must go through a mandatory 30-day review period before they can take effect, giving us time to challenge anything Curtis pressures her into signing. Reed explains this is a huge win because it means Curtis can't rush Phoebe into signing away control the day she turns 18. The school counselor Zara Wooten calls me that afternoon, and she sounds concerned about Phoebe's extended absence from classes. She explains that Phoebe has now missed enough days to put her in danger of failing 2 required courses because of missed tests and assignments that can't be made up. If Phoebe doesn't come back to the school within the next week, she might not have enough credits to graduate on time in 3 months. Zara says she's required to report the attendance issues to the district, and if Phoebe stays gone much longer, there could be truancy proceedings that would involve social services. She asks if there's anything she can do to help get Phoebe back to the school safely. The next morning, I wake up to another email from Justina, and this time there's an attachment. I open it to find a photo of Crystal in a hospital bed holding newborn Phoebe, and on the back of the photo is a handwritten note in Crystal's teenage handwriting. The note explains her decision to choose adoption, saying she wants her baby girl to have the stable life and opportunities she can't provide. Justina's email says Curtis has been calling them repeatedly over the past few days, asking them to vouch for him so he can access Phoebe's trust fund. His pressure tactics have made them deeply uncomfortable, and they want me to know they see right through what he's trying to do. Justina writes that Curtis is using their grief over Crystal, and their desire to know their granddaughter as weapons to manipulate everyone, and they refuse to be part of his scheme. I reply to Justina's email right away, suggesting we meet at a coffee shop halfway between our towns the next afternoon. She responds within minutes, agreeing to the time and place, and I spend the rest of the evening rehearsing what I'll say, trying to anticipate questions they might ask about the adoption and my relationship with Phoebe. I barely sleep that night, my mind spinning through scenarios where this meeting goes wrong or right, wondering if Crystal's parents will see me as the woman who gave their granddaughter a stable life, or as someone who kept them apart for 17 years. The next morning drags by slowly as I check the clock every few minutes, finally leaving an hour early just to have something to do besides pace around my empty house. I arrive at the coffee shop 20 minutes before our scheduled meeting and order tea I don't drink, sitting at a corner table where I can watch the door and see them arrive. Justina and Alvin walk in exactly on time, and I recognize them immediately from the photo Justina attached to her email, an older couple with tired eyes and careful movements that speak to years of grief. They spot me right away and approach the table, and Justina reaches out to shake my hand with a grip that's firm but not aggressive, her face showing cautious openness rather than hostility. We sit down together and there's an awkward moment where nobody speaks, all of us aware that this conversation matters deeply and could go badly if we're not careful with our words. Justina breaks the silence first, thanking me for meeting them and explaining that they've thought about reaching out for years, but respected the closed adoption agreement and assumed I would make contact when the time was right. Alvin adds that they never imagined Curtis would be the one to force this meeting, and his tone carries clear disapproval when he says Curtis's name. I take a breath and start explaining my side, telling them about finding the receipt, discovering the 4 months of secret meetings, and Curtis's manipulation of Phoebe through false narratives about forced adoption and stolen money. Justina listens intently, nodding occasionally, and when I mention the trust fund Curtis is trying to access, she exchanges a knowing look with Alvin that tells me they've already figured out his real motivation. Alvin pulls out his phone and shows me text messages from Curtis, asking them to confirm that I'd kept Phoebe from her real family, and requesting they support his claim that the trust money should benefit him too since his parents set it up. The messages make my stomach turn because they're so transparently manipulative. Curtis trying to use grieving grandparents as pawns in his scheme to access Phoebe's education fund. Justina's voice gets tight when she talks about Crystal, describing her daughter's struggles with addiction that started in middle school and escalated through her teenage years, making it impossible for her to care for a baby even though she loved Phoebe desperately. She explains that Crystal was clear-eyed about her limitations when she chose adoption, wanting Phoebe to have stability and opportunities she couldn't provide, and the decision had nothing to do with money or pressure from anyone. Alvin reaches into a folder he brought and pulls out several letters, explaining that Crystal wrote them to Phoebe during her last year of life, when she was trying to stay clean, intending them to be given to her daughter someday when she was old enough to understand. He hands me the letters with shaking hands, and I read through them carefully, seeing Crystal's teenage handwriting mature into adult script as the letters progress through the years. The first letter is dated 2 weeks after Phoebe's birth, and Crystal writes about holding her baby girl and knowing she had to let her go, describing the adoption as the most loving thing she could do even though it broke her heart. Later letters talk about Crystal's continued struggles, her relapses and recovery attempts, and her hope that Phoebe would grow up happy and never have to deal with the addiction that destroyed Crystal's life. In every letter, Crystal is clear that the adoption was her choice, made with full understanding and without coercion from anyone, and she never once suggests that Curtis was a victim or that money changed hands inappropriately. The letters never mention Curtis at all except for one brief line where Crystal notes that he wasn't ready to be a parent, and she didn't blame him for that, but she wanted Phoebe to have more than either of them could offer. I feel tears burning my eyes as I read Crystal's words, seeing the genuine love and sacrifice behind the adoption decision, and I look up at Justina and Alvin with new understanding of what they've lost. Justina wipes her own eyes and tells me that Curtis has been twisting Crystal's memory, using their grief as a weapon to manipulate Phoebe and make himself look like a wronged father instead of an absent one. She says they're angry about it, furious that he's exploiting their dead daughter's story to access money and control Phoebe, and they want to help set the record straight. Alvin adds that they feel guilty for not reaching out sooner, for assuming I would facilitate contact when Phoebe was ready, instead of taking initiative themselves, and now Curtis has filled that void with lies that serve his agenda. I assure them that I understand their position, that the closed adoption created barriers for everyone, and I've always planned to help Phoebe connect with her maternal family when she was mature enough to handle the complexity. Justina asks what they can do now to help Phoebe see the truth, and I suggest they might be willing to meet with her directly, to share Crystal's letters and their own memories, to show her that the adoption story Curtis told her is fiction. They both agree immediately, saying they want their granddaughter to know them, but they want it to be based on honesty, not Curtis's manipulation and false narratives. We talk for another hour, sharing stories and information, building a foundation of trust that feels fragile but real, and by the time we leave the coffee shop, I feel like I have allies in this fight to protect Phoebe from Curtis's schemes. As I drive home, I think about how to approach this next step, how to get Phoebe to agree to meet her maternal grandparents without Curtis present to control the narrative and twist their words. That evening, I sit in my living room with my phone, opening the camera app and hitting record, speaking directly to the lens as if Phoebe is sitting across from me. I keep my voice calm and factual, explaining that I met with Justina and Alvin today, that they shared Crystal's letters and their memories, and they want to meet her, but they want her to have accurate information first. I tell her that I'm not trying to keep her from family, that I've never wanted to erase her birth parents or pretend her adoption didn't happen, but Curtis is manipulating everyone's grief and love to serve his own financial interests. I explain that her maternal grandparents are willing to speak with her directly, to answer any questions she has about Crystal and the adoption, and I'll arrange a meeting whenever she's ready. I emphasize that I'm not asking her to choose sides or cut Curtis out of her life, just to hear all sides of the story from people who actually knew Crystal and were there when these decisions were made. The video runs 4 minutes and I watch it back twice, making sure my tone doesn't sound defensive or angry, just honest and open to whatever Phoebe needs. I save the video to my phone and then call Reed, asking his advice about how to send it to Phoebe without violating any legal boundaries or giving Curtis ammunition to claim harassment. Reed listens to my plan and suggests I send the video through Detective Copeland instead of directly to Phoebe, creating a documented chain of communication that shows I'm working through proper channels and not trying to manipulate or pressure her. I agree and forward the video to Detective Copeland with a brief explanation, asking him to facilitate delivery to Phoebe when he thinks the timing is appropriate. Detective Copeland calls me back 20 minutes later, confirming he received the video and will make sure Phoebe gets it, and he mentions that Curtis's behavior at the bank has strengthened the case significantly. He explains that Curtis's attempt to access the trust fund shows clear financial motivation rather than genuine parental concern, and the bank's security footage of him getting angry and confrontational will be useful evidence if this goes to court. I thank him and hang up, feeling like pieces are finally falling into place, like the truth is starting to break through Curtis's carefully constructed lies. The next few days pass slowly as I wait to hear from Phoebe, checking my phone obsessively for calls or texts that don't come. I try to stay busy with work and household tasks, but my mind keeps drifting to my daughter, wondering where she is and what Curtis is telling her about my meeting with her maternal grandparents. On day 7 since Phoebe left home, my phone finally rings with her number, and I answer so fast I almost drop the device, my heart pounding as I hear her voice for the first time in a week. She sounds tight and confused, asking if I really talked to Crystal's parents, and I confirm that I met with Justina and Alvin yesterday, that they wanted to meet her but wanted her to have accurate information first. Phoebe is quiet for a moment, processing this, and then she asks if they really have letters from Crystal, and I tell her yes. Multiple letters written over years, all making clear that the adoption was Crystal's choice made out of love. I offer to arrange a meeting with all of us present so she can hear directly from them about Crystal's life, her struggles, and her decision to choose adoption for Phoebe's sake. Phoebe's voice gets smaller when she admits that Curtis has been pressuring her to sign papers that would give him access to help manage her trust fund when she turns 18. She says his reaction at the bank scared her when he got angry with the staff for refusing to give him information, and she's starting to wonder if some of his stories don't add up the way they did at first. I feel a surge of hope hearing doubt creep into her voice, but I force myself to stay calm and not push too hard, knowing that if I attack Curtis directly, she'll just defend him out of loyalty. Instead, I focus on listening, acknowledging how confusing this must be for her, how hard it is to know who to trust when different people are telling different versions of the same story. I tell her that I've always planned to give her information about her birth family when she was ready, that I never wanted to keep her from knowing Crystal's parents or understanding her adoption story. I explain that Curtis's timing is suspicious for good reason, that he showed up exactly 3 months before she turns 18, and gains access to her trust fund, and his focus on money rather than relationship suggests his motivations aren't purely about wanting to know his daughter. Phoebe doesn't respond right away, and I can hear her breathing on the other end of the line, processing everything I've said, and weighing it against what Curtis has told her. Finally, she says she needs to think about things, that she's not ready to come home yet, but she wants to meet her maternal grandparents, and can I set that up without Curtis being there first? I agree immediately, relief flooding through me that she's willing to hear another side of the story, and I tell her I'll coordinate with Justina and Alvin and let her know when and where we can all meet together. I call Reed right after hanging up with Phoebe and explain that she wants to meet, but insists Curtis be there too so everyone can tell their side of the story. Reed goes quiet for a moment, then tells me this could actually work in our favor because Curtis tends to expose his own inconsistencies when he's challenged directly, but we need to control the environment carefully. He suggests a family restaurant during lunch hours when it's busy enough that Curtis won't make a scene, but not so crowded we can't hear each other, and he'll coordinate with Detective Copeland to be present, but not obviously so. I agree, and Reed says he'll call Justina and Alvin to prepare them for what to expect, warning them that Curtis will likely try to dominate the conversation and paint himself as a victim. The meeting gets set for noon at a chain restaurant near the highway, neutral territory that none of us have history with, and I spend the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but mostly staring at my computer screen thinking about seeing Phoebe after a full week apart. That evening, Reed comes over to my house and we sit at the kitchen table going over strategy like we're preparing for a trial. He coaches me to stay calm no matter what Curtis says, to avoid getting defensive or emotional, to let Justina and Alvin's testimony about Crystal speak for itself without me jumping in to defend myself. He reminds me that the goal isn't to win an argument, but to plant seeds of doubt in Phoebe's mind about Curtis's version of events, and sometimes the best way to do that is to stay quiet and let other people contradict him. I practice taking deep breaths and keeping my face neutral when Reed role-plays some of the things Curtis might say, the accusations about buying Phoebe or manipulating the adoption, and it's harder than I expected to just sit there and not react. Reed tells me to focus on facts rather than emotions, to remember that I have documentation, and witnesses on my side while Curtis only has his manipulative storytelling, and that Phoebe is smart enough to eventually see through the lies if we give her the space and information to do so. The next morning, I arrive at the restaurant 15 minutes early and choose a booth in the back corner where we'll have some privacy, but still be visible to other diners. Detective Copeland is already there, sitting at the counter with a newspaper and a coffee like any other customer, and he gives me a slight nod when I walk past. Justina and Alvin arrive a few minutes later and slide into the booth across from me, both looking nervous but determined, and Justina reaches across to squeeze my hand briefly before we settle in to wait. At exactly noon, Phoebe walks through the door with Curtis right behind her, his hand on her shoulder in a way that looks protective, but feels possessive, and my daughter looks exhausted with dark circles under her eyes, and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, instead of the careful styling she usually does. She's wearing clothes I don't recognize, probably things Curtis bought her, and she won't quite meet my eyes as they approach the table. Curtis immediately starts talking before they even sit down, saying something about how glad he is we can all finally have an honest conversation. But Justina cuts him off in a firm voice that reminds me she raised a daughter through addiction, and probably dealt with plenty of manipulators before. She tells Phoebe directly that she needs to hear the truth about her mother from people who actually knew and loved Crystal, not from someone who was barely around during the pregnancy and disappeared afterward, and Curtis's face tightens, but he sits down without responding. Justina pulls out a folder she brought with her and opens it carefully, revealing letters written in Crystal's handwriting on lined notebook paper, some of them stained and creased from being read multiple times over the years. She explains that Crystal wrote these letters during her various attempts at rehab, trying to work through her feelings about giving Phoebe up for adoption, and every single one makes clear that it was her choice made out of love rather than coercion. Phoebe leans forward to look at the letters, and I can see her hands shaking slightly as Justina reads portions aloud, Crystal's words describing her addiction struggles, and her certainty that she couldn't provide the stable home a baby needed. Alvin speaks up for the first time, his voice gruff but gentle, confirming that Curtis was never really involved after Crystal got pregnant. He says Curtis showed up a few times early on, but disappeared when things got hard, never contested the adoption or asked to be part of the process, and only his parents stayed in touch trying to help Crystal get clean. The way Alvin says it, matter of fact and without anger, seems to land harder than if he'd been accusatory, and I watch Phoebe's face as she processes this information that contradicts everything Curtis has told her. Curtis tries to deflect by bringing up the money angle, claiming I paid his parents to force him out of Phoebe's life, but Justina shuts that down immediately by pointing out that Crystal's decision had nothing to do with money. She explains that Crystal was terrified of losing Phoebe to the same addiction that was destroying her own life, that she wanted her daughter to have stability and safety that neither Curtis nor Crystal could provide at 16 and 19 with no jobs and serious substance abuse problems. The tension at the table is thick enough to cut, and I can see Phoebe's eyes moving between Curtis and her maternal grandparents, trying to reconcile two completely different versions of the same story. Curtis shifts tactics and brings up the trust fund, suggesting it's family money that should benefit all of them since his parents set it up, and I feel my jaw tighten, but I stay quiet like Reed coached me. Alvin doesn't stay quiet though, stating bluntly that Martha and James Miller set up that fund specifically for Phoebe's education because they didn't trust Curtis with money, having bailed him out of financial trouble multiple times before they died. The directness seems to shock Phoebe, and Curtis's face flushes red with anger at being called out so plainly in front of everyone, his careful victim narrative crumbling under the weight of facts from people who actually knew his parents. Curtis stands up abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor, and tells Phoebe they're leaving right now. But Phoebe hesitates for the first time since this whole thing started, looking between Curtis standing over her and me sitting calmly across the table, and I can see visible confusion on her face about what to do. Curtis gets more insistent, reaching for her arm and saying they don't have to listen to these lies. But I stay seated and speak quietly to Phoebe that the choice is hers, and my door is always open whenever she's ready to come home. For a long moment, nobody moves, and I hold my breath hoping she'll choose to stay. But then Phoebe stands up and follows Curtis toward the exit, though she glances back twice before they disappear through the door. Justina reaches across the table to squeeze my hand again, her eyes sad but knowing, and she tells me that seeds of doubt have been planted, and sometimes that's all you can do when someone is caught in manipulation. You have to trust they'll eventually see the truth. I nod but can't speak past the lump in my throat, watching through the window as Curtis's car pulls out of the parking lot with my daughter inside. Detective Copeland comes over to our booth after they leave and says he documented everything from his position at the counter, noting Curtis's controlling body language and aggressive behavior when confronted with facts, and he's received approval from the DA to file formal charges for the forged dismissal form. He explains that Curtis will be charged within the week, which should force him to focus on legal defense rather than continuing to manipulate Phoebe. And while it won't bring her home immediately, it adds pressure that might make Curtis show his true colors more clearly. That evening, I'm sitting on my couch staring at my phone when Detective Copeland calls with an update. He says he reviewed the security footage from the restaurant and documented Curtis's controlling behavior throughout the meeting, the way he tried to physically direct Phoebe and cut off other people's testimony, and he's including all of it in the case file for the DA. The charges will be filed formally by the end of the week, and Curtis will have to appear in court, which means he'll need to focus on his legal problems instead of spending all his time working on Phoebe. I thank the detective and hang up, then spend the next 2 days in a fog of worry and waiting, checking my phone constantly for any message from Phoebe. I go through the motions at work and try to keep my house clean and Phoebe's room ready for when she comes home, if she comes home and the uncertainty is worse than anything else. On the second night after the restaurant meeting, my phone buzzes at 11 p.m. with a text from Phoebe asking if we can talk, just the two of us. My heart jumps and I respond immediately that I'm available anytime and anywhere she wants to meet, trying to keep my message calm and not too eager. She suggests a coffee shop near her school the next morning, and I agree right away, then spend the rest of the night unable to sleep, trying not to hope too much that this means she's ready to come home, but unable to stop the tiny flame of possibility from growing in my chest. I arrive at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and sit facing the door, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea I don't drink. When Phoebe walks in, the first thing I notice is how tired she looks. Dark circles under her eyes and her shoulders slumped forward in a way that makes her seem smaller than she is. She slides into the seat across from me without meeting my eyes, and I wait for her to speak first, not wanting to push too hard and scare her away. She fidgets with her phone for a moment before setting it face down on the table between us. The words come out quiet and hesitant as she admits she's been staying at a motel on the east side of town, the kind with hourly rates and flickering neon signs. Curtis is paying for it with money he borrowed from someone, though she won't say who, and I can see the discomfort in the way she won't look directly at me when she explains the arrangement. She tells me he asked her to sign a document 3 days ago, something promising to pay him back from her trust fund once she turns 18, and her voice gets steadier when she says she refused. I feel a rush of relief that she didn't sign anything, but I keep my face neutral and let her continue talking. The motel room is small and smells like cigarettes even though it's supposedly non-smoking, and she's been sleeping on top of the covers because the bedspread looks stained. She's been eating fast food for every meal because Curtis keeps saying he'll take her grocery shopping but never does, and I can see she's lost weight in the week she's been gone. Her voice drops even lower when she describes how Curtis reacted after the restaurant meeting with Justina and Alvin, his face going red and his hands clenching into fists as he drove them back to the motel. He accused her of being brainwashed by me and her maternal grandparents, saying they'd poisoned her mind against him with lies and manipulation. The anger in his voice scared her because it reminded her of something Justina had mentioned during lunch, a story about why Crystal kept her distance from Curtis during the pregnancy. Crystal's parents had told Phoebe that Curtis would get angry when things didn't go his way, that he'd punch walls and throw things and blame everyone else for his problems. Phoebe is starting to see patterns she didn't want to acknowledge before, the way Curtis controls where they go and who they talk to, how he gets defensive whenever she asks questions about his past. She tells me about the time she asked to see his apartment, and he said it wasn't ready for visitors, or when she wanted to meet his friends and he claimed they were all busy. Every story he's told her has started to feel rehearsed, like he's practiced the words until they sound natural, and she's noticing the inconsistencies that don't line up with what other people have said. I sit quietly through all of this, my hands still wrapped around my cold tea, and I don't interrupt even when she pauses for long stretches. When she finally runs out of words and looks at me with those exhausted eyes, I take a slow breath before responding. I tell her simply that I love her and want her to be safe, that whatever she decides about her relationship with Curtis is ultimately her choice once she's 18. But right now she's still 17, and I have a legal and moral responsibility to protect her, which is why I involved the police and lawyers. I explain that I'm not trying to control her or keep her from knowing her birth family, but Curtis has shown through his actions that his interest is in the trust fund, not in building a genuine relationship with her. Phoebe's eyes fill with tears and she asks in a small voice if she can come home. I feel my own tears spring up immediately, and I reach across the table to take her hand, telling her yes without any hesitation. She squeezes my fingers tight and admits she's scared of how Curtis will react when he finds out, that he's been checking in on her every few hours and gets angry if she doesn't respond to his texts right away. I pull out my phone right there at the coffee shop and call Detective Copeland, explaining the situation while Phoebe sits across from me looking relieved and terrified at the same time. The detective listens carefully, and then tells me he can coordinate with patrol officers to accompany us to the motel for a safe pickup of Phoebe's belongings. He mentions that Curtis is actually at the police station right now being processed on the forgery charges, so the timing works perfectly for getting Phoebe's things without a confrontation. We finish our drinks and I pay the bill. Then Phoebe follows me in her car to the motel where we meet 2 patrol officers in the parking lot. The officers walk with us to room 117, and Phoebe unlocks the door with shaking hands. Curtis isn't there like Detective Copeland promised, and I stand in the doorway while Phoebe quickly moves around the small space gathering her belongings. I can see her hands trembling as she stuffs clothes into her backpack and grabs her laptop from the desk. She picks up the photo album I made her when she was little, the one with pictures from her first day of kindergarten and her 7th birthday party, and clutches it against her chest for a moment before sliding it carefully into her bag. The whole process takes less than 10 minutes, and then we're walking back to the parking lot with the officers following behind us. Phoebe gets in my car this time, leaving hers in the motel lot to be picked up later, and we drive home in silence. She stares out the passenger window watching the familiar streets go by, and I don't push her to talk or fill the quiet with reassurances. When we pull into our driveway and I put the car in the park, she breaks down crying with her face in her hands. The apologies pour out between sobs, saying she's sorry for not believing me and sorry for leaving and sorry for being so stupid. I unbuckle my seatbelt and pull her into a hug across the center console, telling her that Curtis is very good at manipulation, and she has nothing to apologize for. I stroke her hair like I did when she was little, and let her cry until the sobs turn into hiccups, and then into quiet sniffles. We go inside and I make her favorite dinner while she takes a long shower in her own bathroom, and when she comes downstairs in clean pajamas, she looks more like herself than she has in weeks. That evening my phone rings and Reed's name appears on the screen. I answer while Phoebe is curled up on the couch watching a movie, and I take the call in the kitchen where she can't hear. Reed explains that Curtis has been released on bail, but the restraining order remains in effect, prohibiting him from contacting Phoebe directly or coming within 500 feet of our house or her school. He's also filed paperwork with the probate court to extend the trust protection measures through Phoebe's 19th birthday, giving her more time to mature before making major financial decisions about the education fund. The next morning I call the school and speak with Zara Wooten, the counselor who's been helping coordinate Phoebe's return. Zara arranges for Phoebe to make up her missed work through a combination of independent study packets and extended deadlines on major assignments. She explains that Phoebe will need to work hard over the next few weeks, but graduation is still possible if she stays focused and completes everything on time. Zara also offers to meet with Phoebe weekly to provide support as she processes everything that's happened, and I agree immediately, because I know Phoebe needs someone outside the situation to talk to. That afternoon, while Phoebe is upstairs doing homework, my phone buzzes with a series of text messages from Curtis's number. The messages are angry and accusatory, calling me a manipulator who poisoned his daughter against him. He threatens to sue for parental rights and claims he has lawyers who will prove I interfered with his relationship with Phoebe. The messages keep coming, each one more aggressive than the last, and I screenshot every single one before forwarding them to Reed. Reed responds within minutes telling me not to reply to Curtis under any circumstances, that any response could be twisted and used against me. He forwards the screenshots to Detective Copeland as evidence of continued harassment despite the restraining order. 2 days later, Justina calls and asks if Phoebe would like to visit them the following weekend. I check with Phoebe first and she says yes with genuine enthusiasm, so I arrange to drive her there on Saturday morning. The drive takes about an hour and Phoebe seems nervous but excited as we pull up to Justina and Alvin's house in a quiet neighborhood. They greet us at the door with warm hugs, and I can see Phoebe relax a little when Justina takes her hand and leads her inside. The visit lasts most of the day, with Justina and Alvin sharing stories about Crystal's childhood and showing Phoebe family photos in old albums. They talk about Crystal's love of art and music, her struggles with addiction that started in her early teens, and her clear determination to give Phoebe a better life through adoption. Alvin shows Phoebe a box of Crystal's things they've saved, including a journal where Crystal wrote about her pregnancy and her hopes for her baby's future. The visit is emotional with tears and laughter mixed together and when we leave in the late afternoon, Phoebe seems lighter somehow, like a weight has been lifted. On the drive home, she tells me it felt good to learn about Crystal from people who really knew her, not from Curtis's distorted version of events. She says Justina and Alvin made her feel connected to her birth mother in a way that feels honest and healing, and she's glad we can all be part of her life now. The following Monday, Phoebe goes back to the school for the first time since coming home. I watch her walk through the front doors, her backpack lighter now that she's turned in most of her makeup work to Zara. At lunch, she sits with her old friend group at their usual table near the windows. Her best friend Maya notices her right away and slides over to make room. Phoebe tells me later that afternoon that she admitted everything to Maya, explaining how Curtis had been feeding her lies for months, and how she'd pushed her friends away because she was so caught up in his version of reality. Maya doesn't judge her or make her feel stupid. Instead, Maya hugs her and tells her that everyone makes mistakes when someone they want to trust manipulates them. The other girls at the table welcome her back without making a big deal about her absence. Phoebe says it felt good to be around people who actually cared about her without wanting something in return. She seems lighter somehow, less weighed down by the secrets she'd been carrying. 2 days later, Reed calls with an update from the district attorney's office. Curtis accepted a plea deal on the forgery charges. He's pleading guilty to a misdemeanor instead of going to trial. The deal includes probation for 18 months and a requirement to stay at least 500 feet away from Phoebe's school at all times. He also has to attend counseling sessions twice a month as part of his probation terms. Reed reads me the exact language from the agreement over the phone. I ask if the counseling will actually change anything about Curtis's behavior. Reed pauses before answering, then admits that court-ordered therapy rarely works unless the person actually wants to change. Curtis is probably just going through the motions to avoid jail time. At least the restraining order stays in effect, and now there are criminal consequences if he violates it. Reed also mentions that the DA's office is keeping the case file open in case Curtis tries anything else. I thank him for everything he's done and hang up feeling relieved that there's at least some legal accountability now. That same week, I take Phoebe to her first appointment with a therapist, who works specifically with adopted kids and families dealing with manipulation. The therapist's office is in a quiet building downtown with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Phoebe goes in alone for her sessions while I wait in the lobby. After her third session, she comes out looking tired but calmer. On the drive home, she tells me what she learned that day. The therapist helped her understand that it's okay to feel angry at Curtis for lying to her, while also feeling sad about losing the fantasy of who she wanted him to be. She doesn't have to choose between those feelings, or pretend one doesn't exist. Phoebe says she's been grieving the dad she imagined Curtis could be, not the actual person he turned out to be. The therapist also talked with her about identity and being adopted, helping her see that her adoption story is complicated, but that doesn't make it bad or wrong. Phoebe seems to be processing everything in a healthier way now. The trust administrator calls the following week to schedule a meeting with Phoebe. We drive to the bank on Saturday morning and sit down in a small conference room with glass walls. The administrator, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, spreads out papers showing exactly how the education fund works. She walks Phoebe through the current balance, which is just over $200,000 now with interest. She explains what expenses the fund can cover, things like tuition, books, room and board, and other education-related costs. She also shows Phoebe the protection measures that are in place, including the requirement that I approve any withdrawals until Phoebe turns 19. The administrator uses simple language and checks frequently to make sure Phoebe understands. Phoebe asks good questions about college planning and whether the money can be used for trade school or other types of training programs. The administrator confirms it can and seems impressed by how thoughtful Phoebe's questions are. When we leave, Phoebe tells me she feels relieved to understand the specifics, instead of relying on Curtis's vague claims about family money that should belong to both of them. 3 days later, I'm in the kitchen making dinner when I hear a car pull into our driveway. I glance out the window and my stomach drops. Curtis is getting out of his car and walking toward our front door. I immediately grab my phone and dial 911 while moving to lock the front door. The operator answers and I explain that someone with a restraining order against him is on my property right now. Curtis knocks hard on the door 3 times. I don't answer or acknowledge him. He calls out Phoebe's name, saying he just wants to talk to her for a minute. Phoebe comes downstairs hearing his voice, but I motion for her to stay back. The 911 operator tells me police are 2 minutes away. Curtis knocks again, harder this time, and I can hear frustration in his voice as he calls out that I'm keeping his daughter from him. After about 90 seconds, he must hear the sirens approaching because he turns and jogs back to his car. He's gone before the patrol car turns onto our street. The officers take my statement and I show them the security camera footage from our doorbell. They radio the information to Detective Copeland. He calls me an hour later to say he's filing a violation of the restraining order. Curtis will get a formal warning that any further contact will result in immediate jail time. Over the next 2 weeks, Phoebe focuses hard on her makeup assignments. She stays up late several nights finishing independent study packets for the classes she missed. Her teachers are understanding and give her extensions on major projects. I watch her work at the dining room table, hunched over her laptop or scribbling notes in her calculus workbook. She's determined not to let Curtis's manipulation mess up her graduation. Her calculus teacher emails me to say Phoebe turned in all her missing work and took the makeup exams. She passed everything and is back on track. Her other teachers send similar updates. One evening while we're eating dinner, Phoebe tells me she's proud of herself for not giving up even though the situation with Curtis made everything so much harder. She could have just accepted failing grades and dealt with summer school, but she chose to push through instead. I tell her I'm proud of her too. As Phoebe's 18th birthday gets closer, about 2 weeks away now, she brings up Curtis during dinner one night. She's been thinking about what happens when the legal restrictions expire, and she's technically an adult who can choose to have contact with him. She tells me she's decided not to pursue any contact with Curtis once she turns 18. She needs time to heal and focus on her own future first. Maybe someday she'll be ready to deal with him. But right now she needs stability and honesty in her life, not more manipulation and lies. She says she might change her mind eventually, but for now she's choosing herself and her own mental health. I tell her that sounds like a wise decision, and that I'll support whatever she decides, now or in the future. The choice has always been hers to make. Justina and Alvin become regular parts of our lives over the following weeks. They visit once a month, driving over on Saturday afternoons to spend time with Phoebe. They also video call with her every week, usually on Wednesday evenings after dinner. During their visits, they share more stories about Crystal, showing Phoebe photos from family albums and telling her about Crystal's childhood. They talk about her love for painting and how she used to spend hours in her room creating art. They also share harder stories about Crystal's struggles with addiction, how it started when she was just 14, and how it controlled so much of her life. They make sure Phoebe understands that Crystal's choice to place her for adoption was made out of love and clear thinking, not because anyone forced her. Justina tells Phoebe that Crystal wanted her daughter to have chances she couldn't provide. The connection with her maternal grandparents brings Phoebe peace about her adoption story. She's learning about her birth mother as a real person who made a loving choice, not the fantasy version Curtis tried to create. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, about 3 weeks after Phoebe came home, we sit together on the living room couch going through the photo album she took to the motel. She opens it carefully, like she's handling something precious. The pages show her baby pictures, toddler photos, birthday parties, first day of school snapshots. She points to a photo of herself at age 4, wearing a princess costume for Halloween, and asks me to tell her the story behind it. I tell her about how she insisted on wearing that costume for 2 weeks straight, even to the grocery store. She laughs and asks about another photo, then another. Each picture sparks a memory she's heard before but wants to hear again. I realize we're rebuilding trust one memory at a time. Curtis's manipulation caused real damage to our relationship, creating cracks in the foundation we'd built over 17 years. But we're healing together now with honesty, patience, and the support of people who truly love Phoebe for who she is, not what she can provide them. The road ahead won't be easy, and there will be hard days when she questions everything again. But right now, in this moment, we're okay. We're together. And that's enough. That's the full story and the takeaway hidden inside it. I like when these give you something small but real to think about. If it did, then it was worth sharing. Subscribe so the next one finds you right away.